breaking news, maximum alert. Russian fighter jets have once again violated the airspace of the European Union, and therefore, of the entire North Atlantic Alliance. In this case, we're talking about the skies over Estonia. Panic in NATO. Estonia calls for consultations under Article 4. All of this is happening, moreover, with the hysteria still very present from those supposedly Russian drones that, not so long ago, they say, attacked the skies over Poland. Social alarm is growing and becoming stronger and stronger, an extremely dangerous message at all levels, and for the skies of the European Union. And therefore, it could be said that not even NATO itself is safe anymore. Who benefits from this message sinking deep into Western society? Let's analyze it. Let's go straight to the facts. Absolute panic is being experienced right now in Estonia, and I would even say throughout all of NATO. It turns out that one of the Baltic tigers has experienced firsthand what it's like to face an aerial threat from the Russian Federation. Estonia reports that on the morning of September 19th, not one, not two, but three MiG-31 fighter jets from the Russian Federation violated the country's airspace. It happened right above the Gulf of Finland, more specifically over the island of Wainlo, of course. The Estonian authorities immediately began to take action. They summoned the chargé d'affaires of the Russian Federation for consultations, issued the corresponding statement, and called for consultations under Article 4 of NATO. The Estonian Minister of Foreign Affairs came out to speak, saying that this is already the fourth violation of this kind by the Russian Federation. That has happened so far this year. In light of all this, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation denies everything and says that the Russian planes actually flew exactly as they were supposed to, and in no case did they enter Estonian airspace. But that actually doesn't matter anymore. No, absolutely no one, because where we say Estonia, we say Poland, which, by the way, not so long ago, it already suffered another supposed attack by the Russian Federation, where Russian drones violated Polish airspace and even destroyed a house. But according to Polish media themselves, to this day it's not clear if the house in question was actually destroyed. Really by a Russian drone. Could all of this actually be more of a decoy drone? Or in any case, a reconnaissance drone? That is, it wasn't carrying any explosive payload, or by a Polish missile. In other words, a NATO air defense missile that was trying to intercept the drone in question. Be that as it may, it now seems that Russia has once again violated Polish airspace. Either that, or the Polish felt something like envy, whether healthy or not, towards their Estonian neighbors, and decided to draw some attention as well. Thus, the Polish border guard, shortly after the Estonian authorities announced that supposed violation of their airspace by the Russian Federation's air forces, reported the same thing. But this time, Russia had attacked. Not just anything. Well, flown over for now. But here in NATO, this is practically equated to a possible attack by one of the most strategic facilities in Poland today, which is the LOTOS oil platform. Petrobal, it is indeed located in the Baltic Sea, and the Russian fighter jets, in this case 2 of them, flew over it at an altitude of 150 meters, according to Poland. And this is truly an extremely serious incident, since we are talking about a facility that, according to Poland itself, ensures its energy independence. The reality of all this is that both the gas and oil that come from that platform, which extracts them from the Baltic Sea, do so in very small quantities, especially when compared to the needs of the Polish country. But anyway, the story is already set up. All of this must also be spiced up with those photos that the Swedish armed forces have already shared on their social media. Because when it comes to defending NATO's airspace, well, maybe they won't be that strong. But when it comes to taking photos, they're among the first and, of course, the best. So here you have those amazing shots taken from Swedish fighter jets. Subject attack spanning 39 Gripen, Saab, shortly after. In fact, according to what they say, those Russian planes flew over Estonian airspace to target something. Also, obviously, the fact of how well the NATO armed forces handle it. In the photograph, it should be noted that one of the supersonic interceptors from one of the Russian fighter jets is missing one of its 4 missiles. These are R-73 air-to-air missiles. There should be 4, but for some reason there were only 3. Of course, we don't know what happened, whether it was due to a previous attack carried out by the aircraft in question, or maybe it's just the Russian Federation wanting to play with NATO's nerves. After presenting the facts, let's move to analysis. Who could benefit from the most obvious consequence of the events I just told you about? Which is, without a doubt, the state of collective hysteria and the constant alarm message that seems to be trying to sink as deeply as possible into the civil society of the European Union. But we could almost say the same about NATO as a whole. Here I would say that there are at least 2 possibilities, or maybe even a mix of both. Here, of course, I would love to hear your opinion. First of all, maybe we should look at it in the most obvious way. That is, focus on those who are going to benefit most directly from this message. What is the most direct consequence? That their skies are no longer protected at all. Well, logically, that NATO tries to reinforce those borders, those countries, and therefore, both end up receiving juicy amounts of money in the form of military aid that is supposedly meant to protect the entire Western population as a whole, because they are the ones closest to the Russian Federation. They need to be as prepared as possible for a potential Russian attack, which I can assure you is neither planned nor going to happen. But who cares about that when all that matters is receiving, or maybe even laundering, as much money as possible? In this case, obviously, we highlight both the role of the Baltic Tigers themselves, on one hand, and Poland, of course, as well as the role of the general at the moment of taking that money from the pile generously contributed by our country's taxpayers and transferring it directly to where it is supposedly most needed. In this sense, it wouldn't be surprising if other countries, 2 Baltic Tigers could also report possible aerial threats from the Russian Federation in order to try to receive their corresponding share as well from NATO funds. The second point could even be more interesting than the first, and that's regarding the Russian Federation. Although, of course, it neither benefits nor pleases her to have NATO, much less heavily armed right on her border. But certainly, could it benefit her in the situation she is in right now for the North Atlantic Alliance to be arming those who shout the loudest? And here's the main point: those who are not Ukraine, because this also happens with one of the most recent deliveries of European Union aid for Ukraine, which is in fact the first delivery that comes with the participation of the United States, but without direct involvement in the United States. That is, Europe takes its taxpayers' money, gives it to the United States, which then provides the weapons that Europe later sends to Ukraine. For Donald Trump and his country, it's a perfect deal. In fact, he himself admitted just a few moments ago that he doesn't like making money from the war in Ukraine. But certainly, right now, the United States is making money from the war in Ukraine. And of course, the first thing Russia needs is to solve the key problem it has on its borders, which is an absolutely hostile country, armed by the North Atlantic Alliance, which is, ultimately, Ukraine and therefore, the Ukrainian problem. Weapons that go to Poland, Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania are weapons that, for now, are not going to end up in Ukraine, and therefore, it will facilitate the achievement of Russian objectives as quickly as possible. That is to say, within the special military operation. Of course, it could very well be a mix of both versions. The truth is, whoever benefits from it, the only ones who are losing, once again, much to my regret, are still the Western taxpayers, who keep paying for the greed of their elites.